Welcome to Obsession Engineering. The BMW is back on the bench because it's done its last short circuit meeting for a while. So today I'm going to give it its usual cleaning and checking routine, and I'm also going to do the prep work it needs so that it can survive the rigours of the Isle of Man TT course. Having covered my normal cleaning and prepping routine on the BMW a few weeks ago, I'm not going to cover all the little bits about cleaning brakes and lubing chains and bits. I'm just going to show you the modifications I'll be doing to the bike to get it ready for the TT. The bike has now covered 7,216 miles, but it's only covered 200 miles since it last had its change of Motul 300V and a fresh oil filter, so it doesn't need that doing for another 300 miles yet, which is a few laps of the island. What it does need though is the air filter checking and this fuel tank taking off, because we have a much bigger one to go on for the TT. Under the comfy bit of seat is the seat support that holds everything at the right height, and all the fasteners are taped, and I've just taken the tape off this one, and because I don't take the bike apart all the time and check every single fastener, this one has come ever so slightly loose. So just lost a bit of tension, but because it had tape over it, it's not come out, which means the seat unit's all in the same place and it's pretty much okay. Especially with fiberglass, because the fiberglass will pack down over a while and sort of crush a little bit. This is why we tape the fasteners, because then the bolt doesn't fall out and the seat doesn't come really, really loose. So that's it. Taping fasteners is a good idea. This is not my first BMW, and it's not the first BMW I've run at the TT, and when I built the bike I built it specifically for the TT, so there are a few little touches that I did when I first built the bike, just to cover some bases. Things like, there's a little bit of rubber on here, because it rubs on the wiring harness, and so that bit of rubber stops the wiring loom fretting against like the sharp edge of the fiberglass there, because there's so much vibration and so long at high speed around the TT that a tiny bit like that could fret through a wire in here and you'd be out of a race for something really insignificant. So that's one of the little touches. If we get that out of the way. I've also removed the ABS pump module from the ABS sort of control module. Now on these bikes you have to leave the control module in place, but you can take the pump off it. So that's been modified and there is a plate on there and it's all been sealed up correctly. And the gyro is also mounted onto the front of the ABS module, because normally it would sit on the back of this plastic bracket, which we're not going to have in there when we put the big tank on. So a lot of the sort of prep work has already been done, because this is not my first rodeo. Standard tank is off the bike, including all the bracketry that I don't need, and the next thing I need to do is take the fuel pump out of this one so that I can put it in my new big tank. The fuel pump is out of the original tank, and you will notice there is no float here for telling me the fuel level, and there's a reason for that, is because when it goes onto low fuel load, it stops the lap timer and just puts the fuel light on instead, which is quite annoying. Especially annoying as with the tank extension on the back of a TT tank on, the fuel light comes on with about 10 litres of fuel left. So I've had it in the past where the fuel light comes on and you're at Crosby on the second lap, and your lap timer stops and it's a bit annoying. So what I've done here is the actual sort of mechanism is still there, but it's lock-wired in the full-on position, so it thinks it's full of fuel all the time. So that is one mod. I could probably actually take all this off and get rid of it, but this way at least the fuel light's never going to come on and it fixes the problem. So now I just need to put that pump in that fuel tank. I have the fuel pump fitted in the big tank now, and the other difference on this tank, which is actually new for this year, is I've changed the filler cap. So if we go to this one, if we open this, the sort of top of the tank to the bottom of the filler bit, and I've cut out quite a lot of the filler neck so you can get a bit more fuel in, but that depth from there down to under here where the filler cap actually stops is 35mm. So in effect you've got a 35mm sort of void at the top of the tank that you can't use. If we go to this tank, the difference between the top of the tank and the edge of the filler is 15mm. So that's considerably better, and especially at the back here, there's sort of a cutout where the cap locks in, so that actually reduces it a bit more. So this tank has got, in effect, another 20mm of fuel at the top of the tank, which I haven't calculated it. It might be less than a litre, but it's definitely worth having. Before I put the fuel tank back on the bike though, I need to clean the air filter. So this is a pipe across road spec air filter. So it's got the mesh at the back, so if any stones or anything hit it really, really hard, they won't go through. So I'm going to give this a clean and then a re-oil, and that will go in before my big tank goes on. While my air filter is soaking in cleaner, I'm moving on to the rain light. So this just here is my rain light, and it is considerably brighter than you would expect. There is nothing in the way of it, it is very good, and every day I go to scrutineering at short circuits, it is never commented on, because it works perfectly well. The issue at TT is, we're not allowed it there, because they like it further back than the sort of centre of the wheel spindle, which would put it about here. Which is a bit awkward because there's nothing on the back of the bike to mount it to there, so I need to mount one on the seat unit. Now in the past I've had another bullet one like this, but the supplier I bought them from, the quality went downhill and I was changing them almost every day. So what I'm going to do next is make a little bracket and actually fit a normal sort of strip LED at the back of the seat unit. That is my new rain light fitted. It looks a bit ugly, but it is functional with past scrutineering. I really ought to actually clean under the bottom of the under tray as well. The air filter is clean, it is now just drying, so I'm going to leave that overnight, and tomorrow we'll pop that back in and get the new tank on. My pipe across air filter is dried nicely overnight, so what I'm going to do first is oil it up with some Motul air filter oil and get that back in the bike. I've put the air filter back in and I've fitted the big tank. So as you can see, it is, similar shape to the old one, and then sticks out a load at the back. The seat itself that bolts on here will actually fit to the tank there and then to the mounting bracket back here, which means that I need to trim this off, because at the moment that clearly doesn't fit. Now I must have a modified one of these somewhere at home, but I'm not entirely sure where it is. So it's time to modify this one. There is one more job to do under the seat here before I finish bolting everything together. But before I do that, I need to make some more noise. So this is my short circuit Arrow silencer, and it is surprisingly quiet. It goes from 65mm inlet to 55mm outlet, and it goes through noise test normally at about 101, 102 decibels. But for TT, we're allowed to make as much noise as we want. So this is coming off, and the megaphone is going on. This Arrow megaphone is considerably less subtle because noise limits we don't have to worry about. So this pipe goes 65mm inlet to 75mm outlet, and obviously there's not a great deal in the way of perf tube in there. So there's not a lot of sound deadening, and during TT it'll actually sort of keep pushing the sound deadening further away, and it will burn the sleeve a little bit, but that just looks cool really. Since the last TT it has been back to B&C Express, so it has been serviced with all genuine Arrow bits. It is good to go. This makes about 2 horsepower more peak than the short circuit silencer. Isn't quite so smooth through the mid-range, but we're considerably less worried about that, because another 2 horsepower at the top around the Isle of Man is useful. I have also lock-wired the exhaust spring, so basically each end where the spring goes into the hook, I've lock-wired it all together, so that if the spring breaks, it actually stays attached to the bike, because what you don't want is the little sharp end bits of spring coming off the bike and getting stuck in somebody else's tyre or something like that. So all of the springs on the exhaust system all through the bike have been done. It's just another little safety tip. On my bike I run the BMW sort of ECU update and their calibration kit, so this is all super stock legal, and it is basically a BMW remap, so it's pretty handy. For the TT we do run slightly different stuff to what I run at short circuit, so because of the different silencer we've got an ever so slightly different fuel map, and it is actually through the mid-range and bits a little bit leaner, so that we're saving a little bit of fuel, but at top end it has all the fuel in it we need for top speeds. I also run the bike in race mode, not in slick mode, and in slick mode you can't turn off the fuel with the throttle closed, but in race mode you can, so that actually saves a little bit of fuel every time I've got the throttle closed, because it doesn't run fuel into the bike on the overrun. Now the idea on short circuits especially, it just makes the throttle connection a little bit nicer, because it just basically makes it run a little bit richer at the bottom. But at TT I will tolerate the throttle because it's still pretty damn good, and I would like to have less fuel usage. So it's going in race mode, slightly different fuel maps and everything, and I actually run less traction control at TT because over the jumps and stuff you don't want it getting confused thinking it's doing the wrong thing and holding it back. So it's time to fire in the proper program. And here we go. That's a bit noisier than normal. So everything's bolted together quite nicely. All my bolt holes have lined up, although I am going to put a shorter bolt in there because that isn't sort of screwed all the way in yet. And I'm also going to get some bits of rubber and just pack under here to sort of fill in the gap between the base of this seat and the top of the tank. But that's all looking pretty good. What I do need to do though is run a breather line from here down the front of the tank, disappear under there, and to my fuel overflow breather bottle. And I am going to replace this bottle because I have some new ones that we can see through a little bit easier. So that, the tube, non-return valve and bits will be going up there next. So, breather pipe connected, and I've decided to route it underneath this panel, so it comes through the panel, down sort of the outside of the air box, then it comes out of that gap in the frame, comes along with the wiring loom, and then down here, and this is my breather bottle, and the non-return valve is sat upright because these aren't actually sprung loaded non-return valves. These are Yamaha TZ ones, so they are designed for fuel, but it's not sprung loaded, so if you lay it flat, the ball just rolls around in it and it's not actually a very good non-return valve. So if you sit them upright like that, they actually work properly. With the bike happily running and with enough fuel in it out to go round 2 laps of the Isle of Man, we need to work on some chassis work. And the first thing I'm going to do is put it to the gearing and the chain length that we ran last time at TT. So short circuits I run 1643 gearing, but for TT we actually still run the 43 rear, but I run a 17 front because it gives us a better top speed and slightly less acceleration, but that is the right gearing for this bike for the TT. And I'm also going to run another chain. This chain has done nearly 2,500 miles, although it passes the stretch measurement and it has been maintained meticulously. It is time for this one to go. The new Zabaki chain we're putting on, along with the new 17-tooth front sprocket, that will be also run a link longer than the chain that's on it. So it gives us, well, we lose a little bit of chain length with going with a bigger front sprocket, but then we actually gain a little bit of wheelbase with having a longer chain. So basically we end up about 10 millimeters further back, which gives us a bit more stability, a bit less wheelie, and gives us a little bit more weight over the front, because the centre of gravity, if we're moving the back wheel away from it, the centre of gravity is nearer the front wheel. So it'll work pretty well. It is the setting we used last time, so I am confident. So that is the new chain on, 17-tooth front sprocket. I've actually changed the rear sprocket as well for a new one. It wasn't in bad condition, there was just beginning to get a little bit of wear on the teeth, so I've taken it off and put a new one on because I had one in stock. So that is the back end of the bike done with my new long wheelbase setting. It is now time to move on to the front of the bike. So the plan for the front of the bike is pretty simple. I'm just basically doing my normal cleaning and checking routine. So I'm going to clean the calipers, clean the fork bottoms, check the wheel bearings, check the brake discs and bits. I am going to fit a new super stock front tyre, which will start a practice week quite nicely. And then I'm going to do some lock wiring. That's my new D213 super stock front tyre in. I've cleaned the brakes, checked the discs, checked the wheel bearings, all that sort of stuff. My plan is to run the super stock tyre for the entire TT. I mean, don't get me wrong, not this exact tyre, but the super stock shaped tyre. That just gives us one less variable when I go from Superbike spec to super stock spec. So the rear tyre will change, even though the construction and the size is basically the same. But if I run the same front tyre all the time, it's one less thing to worry about for the super stock race. The next thing to do is some more lock wiring. The engine bits are lock wired as per ACU standard, but for road racing I like to lock wire a few extra bits. So I'm going to be lock wiring the caliper bolts, the pinch bolts. These ones have actually been done already because we very, very rarely undo those. The front wheel spindle will be done, and so will the rear. Lock wiring is pretty simple. It's a piece of wire that goes from one bolt to another or to a fixed point on the bike to stop said bolt coming undone. It is also quite easy to get it wrong. This bolt tightens up this way round. So what we need to do is have the wire pulling from, say, this side of it this way. Because if it pulls from this side and pulls that way, it could potentially actually let the bolt come loose. So we always have to make sure we're pulling the bolt tight with the wire. So I'm going to go from sort of this hole just here, and I'm going to go it sort of ever so slightly diagonally to this bolt here, and that means that will pull the two bolts tight at the same time. And that is the first bolt's lockwire. So you can see that is pulling that bolt that way ever so slightly and pulling this bolt that way ever so slightly. So both bolts are sort of getting pulled tight, so they definitely can't come undone. So that is pinch bolts done. Those two, there's not a lot of gap in between, so it's not the neatest lock wiring I've ever done. So that comes around here and holds the wheel spindle, and you'll notice as well I put a little curl in the end of the lock wire and poke it in so it's not going to catch you in the finger when you're messing around touching the bike. That caliper is done, and if we go down the other end of the bike, I've also done the rear wheel spindle nut. Now, I haven't actually drilled this and put lock wire through it, and I haven't drilled the nut because we don't actually have to do any of this extra lock wiring. It's not actually a requirement. It is more peace of mind. So I know that I've tightened that up, and now because that comes around there and actually feeds around the thread, even if the nut did come slightly loose, it can't actually come off the end of the spindle. So I'm happy with that. The next thing to do is open the pink book. And in the pink book I have all of the settings from last time we were at TT, so I know the settings from here were good for a 123 mile an hour lap of the Isle of Man, which is not too bad. So, interestingly, we don't actually change that much from short circuit setup to TT setup. I'm actually going to be running exactly the same springs that I ran at the last meeting. The preloads are a little bit softer for TT, the damping is a little bit more open, as in a little bit softer, so that the wheels can go over the bumps and then recover quicker. The wheelbase is longer, but we've already done that bit. We run a bit more steering damper for stability, and that's about it really. The actual ride heights, the geometry, the basic sort of setup of the bike is very similar. So with most of the big important bits done, now I'm just going to go around, give it a bit of a polish underneath and a bit of a clean up, and then we're on to bodywork. I've been round and I've given the frame and bits around the engine and the hoses and rear sets and foot pegs and everything a good clean and a wipe over and basically a touch and a check. And then I've also been round with my Allen keys and tools, and I've checked the torque on lots of little fasteners and put little dabs of torque check on them, the little orange sort of, it looks like paint but it's actually really a resin, so that if anything moves that actually cracks and you can see if it's moved. So day to day when we're doing the checks on the bike, instead of actually having to go around and actually put the tools on stuff and pull at it, which could potentially sort of disturb Loctite and stuff, we can just go around, visual check it, and it just makes the whole job a little bit quicker checking the bike each day. So that's a little bit done. So the next thing to do is get some bodywork on it. So the nose cone needs to go on the bike first, but before I fit this, I'm going to take off the little double bubble screen and fit my much bigger TT double bubble screen, so I can get tucked in a little bit easier and get the wind off me. So I've gone around the fairing, and all the fairing fasteners I have taped up so that they cannot vibrate loose. Now this fairing has little brackets behind it that have a little bit of flex so that the fairing can move ever so slightly. This bike also has quite good ground clearance under the belly pan, so it very rarely just skims the belly pan if we're through the bottom of Bray Hill a bit rough on the wrong line. If I had slightly less ground clearance, and especially if these mounting points went directly into the frame and there was no flex, then what I would actually do is put some little aluminium brackets behind the mounting holes so that when the fairing hits the floor, it doesn't just break the mounting points out. But luckily on this bike, that's not a problem. And there we have it, resplendent with a new coat of polish, but admittedly missing its numbers because I haven't actually done those yet. That is a mechanically complete motorcycle ready for first practice at the 2022 Isle of Man TT races. It is good to go. All I need to do for first practice though is put petrol in it, put numbers on it, check the tyre pressures, and we're good to go. So that's it, the BMW is near enough ready for TT 2022. Thank you for watching, and join me again next time for some more motorbike fun.